All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It is June 1st, 2018. I am so super excited for today's episode. We have we have an amazing guest and an amazing topic in store for you today. Today, let me go ahead and switch over to my other screen. Today, we are going to be interviewing on Mormon Stories Podcast, Stephen Hassan. Stephen is the world's expert in cults. He's written a book called Combating Cult Mind Control, and he's going to be joining us in about 23 minutes. But we're really, really excited to be interviewing him. And the reason why I'm doing an introduction before we actually bring him on is because he's only able to give us an hour of his time, and there's so much to cover. And so I'm going to be covering some of the material before we actually bring him on, so that we can use all of our time with him very efficiently. Let me give you guys just a little bit of a kind of heads up on what you're going to hear today. Just a little bit of background on me, for those of you who don't know. We're anticipating that Stephen's going to be sharing this presentation broader to his network. And so I'm just going to give a little introduction of myself. Those of you who are Mormon Stories fans will know this. My name is John Dehlin. I grew up as an Orthodox Mormon in Katy, Texas. I served a Mormon mission in Guatemala. I married my wife, Margie, in the Washington, D.C. temple after attending Brigham Young University. We raised four wonderful children together and are raising them as progressive Mormons. I had a successful technology career with Benign Company, Microsoft, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Prior to having a faith crisis, I had my Mormon faith crisis in 2001 while I was teaching early morning seminary for the Mormon Church. However, I loved the church so much and believed in it and cared about it, or at least believed in the goodness of it, that for many, many years, we remained active and faithful in the church for the next 14 years, actually, with a couple of years off as sabbaticals. But I knew that there was a problem with people in transition. I knew that it was way too difficult to leave the Mormon church. And so in 2005, I started a podcast, this podcast, Mormon Stories Podcast, to improve Mormonism. It's been wildly successful. It's been the successful and longest running Mormon themed podcast in the world. We have over 920 hours of interviews to date, audio and video. We have well over 20 million MP3 downloads and YouTube and Facebook views. And so many listeners reached out to me that I went back to school when I was 40 years old, pursued a PhD in clinical and counseling psychology with a focus on religion and mental health, religious faith crises, religious OCD, which is scrupulosity, LGBT issues. And in that process, published 11 peer-reviewed journal articles and one book chapter, and did all I could to make it so I could do a better job supporting those in faith crisis. In 2015, I was excommunicated from the Mormon Church for my LGBTQ plus advocacy, but also for my unwillingness to stop the podcast. I also started during my PhD, the Open Stories Foundation, which is a nonprofit to support Mormons in religious transition. I do provide, in the Open Stories Foundation, we provide workshops and retreats. I also, have a small coaching practice where I coach people who are experiencing a religious faith crisis. You can reach me at johndehlin.com for that private practice. But, the work that we've done has been featured in the New York Times, Good Morning America, National Public Radio, HBO Vice News, The Wall Street Journal, Nightline, VH1. I've done a TEDx talk, and we're super excited that June 25th, the HBO Believer movie starring Dan Reynolds of Imagine Dragons and Tyler Glenn of Neon Trees and myself will be premiering. And so we've done our best to help a lot of people in the process. Now I'm going to introduce you to Stephen Hassan. It is spelled Hassan, not Hassan. Stephen is not Muslim. He's Jewish. He grew up in a conservative Jewish family in Queens, New York. He describes himself as introverted in his in his book. He grew up as a very bookish individual. He loves books. He was an honor student. He skipped 8th grade and graduated early. But while he was a student at Queens College, Steve was recruited into the Moonies. The Moonies, or the Unification Church, is a $1 billion organization that Steve refers to as a cult. And he was basically just, he can tell this story, but basically he was just sitting, I think, at a table, maybe in a cafeteria, and like 3, by his report, attractive young women came up and said, "Hey, come to this thing." And he came to it, and then he got sucked into more little meetings, and over time, through pressure, became a cult member in the Unification Church under the Reverend Sun Young Moon, and in a very short amount of time became a high-level leader in the church. And he was recruiting for them, he was marketing for them, he was fundraising for them, and he had sort of the highest levels of access in that cult. Now, this is in the 70s when Jim Jones was doing what he was doing in Guyana, and Patty Hearst had been abducted by a cult. She was the daughter of a newspaper magnate, and cults were really raging in the 70s. So after 2 years, 2+ years, and Stephen was really plugging, he had this awful car crash, and it broke like his legs, and he was paralyzed, or at least he couldn't walk, immobilized. And in that time, he reached out to his sister, who never made him feel bad about being a member of the Moonies, never called it a cult, never told him he was part of a cult. And so he reached out to her, and she started loving and supporting him. And during that time, his parents came and did an intervention, and long story short, pulled him out of the Moonies. And you can read about this in his book. But afterwards, he obtained a master's degree in counseling psychology from Cambridge College, became a nationally certified counselor and a licensed mental health counselor, so that he could help more people, and ultimately became the founder and director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center. And this is an organization that helps people become psychologically empowered. They promote awareness, and they expose abuses of undue influence. You can access them at freedomofmind.com. And freedomofmind.com and Stephen, they provide training for mental health professionals, educators, law enforcement. I think they've even testified at Congress. And they help families of cult members help get people out of cults. He's got 40 years of cult awareness and activism, and his work has been featured on every major news outlet, including 60 Minutes, CNN, Fox News, The Today Show, Good Morning America, Larry King Live, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NPR, Oprah Winfrey, and USA Today, Bill O'Reilly Show. He's been everywhere, and he's brilliant, and he's wise, and he's kind, and he's compassionate, and he's amazing. He has authored 3 books that we're going to be talking about. One of them, one's called Combating Cult Mind Control. One's called Releasing the Bonds, Empowering People to Think for Themselves. And then another one's called Freedom of Mind, Helping Loved Ones Leave Controlling People, Cults, and Beliefs. So super well-published author, speaks all over the world. And now I'm going to give a disclaimer about the intent of this presentation. We were very careful in how we named this presentation. This presentation is not why the Mormon Church is a cult. And there are lots of reasons that we didn't name it that way, and I think Stephen is going to support these reasons. But we will not be calling the Mormon Church a cult in this presentation. Please don't be disappointed by that. But there are reasons why. We are not calling the Mormon Church a cult in this presentation for many reasons. Number one is Stephen will be the first to tell you that it's counterproductive. I went up to a website to find a list of cults, and the leading world organization for cults refused to give a list of cults. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Why in the world would the world's leading organization on cults refuse to give a list of cults? And the reason why is they said that it's counterproductive. It puts people on the defensive. It makes them stop listening. It creates what we've called in Mormon Stories the backfire effect. It makes people actually cling more tightly to their beliefs and even their damaging beliefs. And so for that reason, we don't think it's going to be effective to sort of take that approach. In addition, if you read Stephen's book and you read about the criteria of cults, you'll realize that there are degrees of cultishness. And while, there are going to be aspects that Mormons identify with, there are going to be aspects that some people find alarming. There are also other aspects that don't meet criteria. You're going to find in there some cults physically brand their members with like a cattle prod. Some cults physically beat and abuse their members. Some of them engage in sleep deprivation and really egregious forms of, seizing people and putting them in prison or, capturing them and not letting them go. There are degrees of cults, and some cults kill people. So for lots of reasons, Mormonism is a complex organization that in some ways will cause alarms and in other ways won't. So, and then finally, the most important thing is that everybody needs to reach their own conclusions on what is and isn't a cult, or what is or isn't cult-like behavior. So, you listeners, you be the judge. If you think the church fits this, then you can think about that. And if you don't, we don't want you to run off thinking we're insulting a religion you love. So one thing that I want to emphasize that Stephen talks about in his book is that there are many types of cults. There are religious cults, there are meditation cults, there are political cults, there are psychotherapy and education cults, there are commercial and corporate cults, there are marketing cults. Utahns should be familiar with multi-level marketing. That can be a cult. Families can be a cult. Marriages can be a cult. Gangs can be cults. There can be internet cults. There are lots of different types of cults. We also are not, focusing on the Mormon church being a cult because we don't want you to think too narrowly in this presentation. We want you to become aware, even if you've left religion altogether, we want you to become aware of anything that could be acting like a cult, anything that could be using undue influence on you. All of that you should be aware of. And so we want you to think broader than just Mormonism in this presentation. You shared this with all the different groups. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and provide definition of a cult so that we can kind of know what we're talking about. Stephen Hassan defines a cult as any group in which mind control is used in destructive ways. Now, mind control may seem scary for some of you. You may be thinking, oh, mind control, that sounds like brainwashing. And Stephen goes into a great explanation in his book about what brainwashing is, what mind control is. We're going to go ahead and give just a brief definition of mind control. Mind control is any system that disrupts an individual's healthy identity development. So if you just think about it, think about your identity, think about anyone who might be in a cult, think about whether or not they have been allowed to develop, to discover who they are, and to develop as individuals versus assuming an identity. And what I've done is I've put together a slide that I'm very proud of. It's very preliminary, but it's borrowing from some of the things I read in Steve's book, but I want to kind of run it by you. This is kind of what I'm identifying as the core problem, and I haven't showed this to Steve yet. But I believe that, as human beings, we've evolved. We've evolved with DNA. We've evolved with personality. We have the genetic combinations of whatever we inherited, plus whatever happened in the womb, plus whatever upbringing we had has given us a personality, has given us a sense of self. And at our core as humans, many would argue we're animals, we're base. If you look 20,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago, think about the caveman. Humans were driven by biological urges for food and shelter, sex and power. I think we have a tendency to want to maximize what I call neurochemical highs. A lot of people get stuck in addictions and drugs and alcohol in unhealthy ways just because or other types of unhealthy coping, whether it's, Netflix or, eating or whatever, we like our brains to feel good. We like that oxytocin. We like that serotonin, and anything that we can get sometimes to trigger those chemical highs can feel really good. And I think Mormonism calls this the natural man. And Mormonism says the natural man is an enemy to God. And that makes sense. We don't want to run around having sex with everything, whether there's consent or, health or whatever. We don't want to run around killing people and being driven by our passions. So just living off of this sort of core native self can be violent. It can be sexist. It can be racist. It can be tribal. It can be uncivilized. It can be addictive, and it can be unhealthy. So what many of us have experienced within a religious context, and specifically within Mormonism, is we joined or were born into a religion. And that religion is less primal. It's more civilized than being a caveman. It's more social. It's more organizational. And it taught us a bunch of values and ethics and morals, gave us community, a sense of identity, a sense of purpose and meaning in the world. It helped resolve a lot of our existential problems in life. There are all sorts of, powerful things that this religion has given us. But the downside of any modern religion, if it's based on the Quran or the Bible, is that we're limited by Bronze Age scripture and ethics, and whatever the organizational ideal is for the human. And so if the Bible says, if someone interprets the Bible to say that being gay is bad, then we're going to have to follow that. If it says women should stay silent or be subservient, then if we follow the scriptures, we're going to have to follow that. If the scriptures say we can cut off someone's head if we don't agree with them, well, then we have the right to do bad things. And if it says God's a genocidal maniac, well, that's who God is because the scriptures say so. But most importantly, religions give us this identity where we feel like we're sort of a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. Because just because a religion tells us who we should be doesn't mean that's who we are. And many religions don't even give us a sense to identify and to discover who we are and to become an authentic self. And so many of us get to whatever point we get to in our religious development, whether it's healthy or not, and but we aren't our fully authentic self. And if we are gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender, if we are a woman, if we're a feminist, if we're an intellectual, if we are skeptical, if we masturbate, heaven forbid, or have sexual experimentation, that religion can become toxic to us. It could literally be fatal to us. It can become deadly. And so we have the choice. We can either regress to the primal self, and that's what that arrow is on the right. For those of you listening just through the audio, this is all on video on YouTube if you want to see the visual aids. But, we have the choice of reverting to our primal self, which is becoming, again, based and driven by biological urges and instincts and our emotions and neurochemical highs, or we have the chance to progress to a more authentic, enlightened self. And what comes with that is a freedom and introspection and self-discovery. And I want to argue that the healthy people keep the good of the religion. They keep the good of the cult that they were a part of. But what they then do is they discard whatever is harmful or inauthentic. So they keep the good, discard the bad, do that self-discovery, and then they add new, authentic, healthy pieces to their experience. And that is sort of what healthy religions do. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to stop this part of the presentation, and I am hoping that Stephen is now joining us. So I'm going to look on the participants. Stephen has not yet joined us. So what we're going to do is make sure we get a hold of Stephen. And while we're doing that, we're going to go ahead and take questions from our listening audience. So we have a bunch of people joining us live. And what I want to do is give people a sense for what the next hour to 2 hours is basically going to be like. So we're going to bring on Stephen, and he is going to talk to us for an hour about his book and about these notions of cults, and we're going to try and apply it. We're not just going to apply it to ourselves. We're not just going to apply it to religions, but we're also going to apply it to ourselves as liberal Mormons, as progressive Mormons, as post-Mormons. All that is legitimate. One of the things that I am very interested in doing and am very motivated to do is also apply this to my podcast, to Mormon Stories, to the Open Stories Foundation. I want to make sure that there's nothing that we're doing within the Open Stories Foundation that could ever be construed as cult-like or that could ever be harmful to people. And so we're going to talk to Stephen. And then what I'd really love to do, if possible, is have maybe 4 or 5 of you join us after the presentation. And what I want to do is we're going to sort of go through Stephen's model for cults, and we are going to do a breakdown of how cults control behavior, control information, control thoughts, and control emotions. And then once we go through that and Stephen shares all of that with us, then what we're going to do is we're going to do an analysis of Mormonism, and I'm even willing to do of the Open Stories Foundation, a Mormon Stories podcast, through the same lens, so that we can understand to what degree there are cult-like things in the church and to what degree there aren't. But when I do that, again, it's not with some secret, insidious desire to label the church a cult or to make people think that Mormonism is cultish. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to learn, and we're trying to help people. And there are a lot of things that we want to try and accomplish in this experience. So, for example, again, I want to find ways that I can, improve the Open Stories Foundation or Mormon Stories Podcast. But we also want to help other Mormons improve their experiences. So if you're in the Mormon Church, if you're struggling, we want to help you understand what might be damaging or what might not be damaging in your experience. We also want to help people who are out of the Mormon Church learn about healthy and unhealthy principles of living, healthy and unhealthy leadership principles, healthy and unhealthy organizational principles, because these experiences apply well beyond Mormonism. And then finally, we want to help people understand what the LDS Church is and how it can help people. So my technical group, Stephen is working furiously to help get Stephen Hassan on, and he's joined us. So wow, without any further ado, Stephen Hassan, welcome so much to Mormon Stories Podcast. It's such a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to do this. It looks like I need more light. Let's see if I can turn on a lamp, if that helps at all. I don't know if that helps at all. Not much, but whatever.
Yeah, no, you look great. I have a special light because I do this for a living.
Got it. Good.
All right, Stephen. Well, we're so glad you could join us. We're really honored. What I want to do is begin by plugging one of the most exciting and amazing books that I've come across in my 15 to 20 years of doing what I'm doing. The book is called Combating Cult Mind Control, and it's a best-selling book. It's a guide to protection, rescue, and recovery from destructive cults. Now, Stephen, what we did before you joined us is we took our audience through your history. And so we explained your 3 books. We explained your biographical information at a high level about your experience with the Moonies. We told everyone about freedomofmind.com and your organization and the sorts of training and consulting and coaching that you do. And we warned everybody that we will not be calling the Mormon Church a cult in this presentation. Can you begin by explaining, maybe supporting that strategy? Why is it, there's a lot of listeners who just are mad. Maybe they're in a mixed faith marriage where their spouse wants to divorce them. Maybe they're mad at their church, or maybe their family isn't respecting them for the things they discovered. Why in the world would it be not prudent for them to use the language of cults when they are dealing with their religious family and friends?
Yeah, so the word is problematic because it has charge to it, depending on where you're coming from. And over the 43 years since my rescue from the Moon Group, it's used so loosely and in different ways that I've just learned to just think of things in terms of healthy groups and unhealthy groups. And open groups that are honest and closed groups that lie when they're recruiting and to their members. It's just, it has less of the problems associated with it. And, when you're in a group that makes assertions that we are the one and only church, or we are the only true whatever, you have a kind of a bubble around that belief system that insulates you and makes you feel like you're special and above everybody else who are in other groups. And it's easy for you to call other groups cults, but don't let anyone call you in a cult. And again, because I've been a mental health professional and been doing this work for 4 decades, I just think the word is loaded. So why use words if it's going to be a stumbling block for some people? And when they tell me, but I like to call a group a cult, I say, you're an adult. You get to do what you want to do. And, my issue with my book goes back to 1988, which was the 10th anniversary of the Jonestown tragedy, with 913 men, women, and over 300 children who died with cyanide-laced flavor aid. And my publisher was like, we got to put cult in the title, so it's got to be combating cult mind control, not combating mind control. And so when I bought the rights back in 2014, the decision was just keep the title basically the same. So I'm kind of stuck with that word cult in the title.
No problem. Okay, so what we want
Sorry
to do.
That was long-winded, John.
No, that's great. That's great.
I'll try to be more succinct.
No, it's really useful. So what I've done is I've put together a presentation that outlines what we call the BITE model. Mm-hmm. And while I'm getting the PowerPoint presentation ready, would you mind explaining to us what the BITE model is, and give it an introduction? And then what we're going to do is we're literally going to go through the B, the I, the T, and the E. We're going to talk about each one in detail, and then we're going to end by showing that continuum that you so brilliantly put together, and we're going to maybe spend the last 15 minutes discussing that continuum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so please give us the high-level overview of the BITE model, and then we're going to go into each one specifically.
So briefly, I guess you've told your listeners that in my deprogramming, Robert Lifton's book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, was used, and his 8 criteria.
No. Go ahead and talk about that.
So I was in the Moon cult. I didn't think I was brainwashed or under mind control. I was in a van crash. I was in crutches. I was basically in a situation of intervention where my family had hired ex-members, and their appeal to me was look, you're an adult, you get to do what you want to do, but let us at least explain why we've left the church and what brainwashing is, so that at least you can know what is known about it. And I was very happy to learn about Chinese communist brainwashing, because that was what Lifton's book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, was all about. He had been an Air Force psychiatrist, military intelligence, studying what was this thing called brainwashing, because the term was coined in the 50s. And he came up with 8 criteria that any environment may be judged as a brainwashing, or he preferred the term thought reform environment. And Lifton is a genius. He's written like 20 plus books. I've read them all. One of the most important people in my career, because when I got out of the Moonies, I went and saw him and said, your book saved my life. Kind of a little bit like what you were just doing. This book is really incredible. That's what his book was for me. And he said, which book? And I said, Thought Reform. He said, that old book? Why was it so important to you? And I said his 8 criteria was revelatory for me. It helped give me a touchstone on what are the characteristics that make up a destructive mind control environment. But the book is very ivory tower. He's a genius. It's not meant for the lay person to read. I had to read it over and over again. I had to look up a lot of words when I was reading it. And as I began my journey of self-healing to try to understand everything I could about persuasion and attitude change and hypnosis and everything else, the paradigm that was put forth by a social psychologist named Leon Festinger stood out for me as monumentally important. Leon Festinger wrote a book called When Prophecies Fail, about a UFO cult. I believe the book was written in the 50s. And the idea of what he wrote about in this book was that this woman was claiming a UFO was going to land at a mountaintop, and all the followers sold their goods and went up to the mountaintop. And when the UFO didn't arrive, he thought everyone would be disillusioned and leave, but he realized people actually believed more. And he was like trying to come up with like, how is it possible that people would believe more? And he came up with this concept that's critical called cognitive dissonance theory. Cognitive dissonance theory is the underlying on all cognitive behavioral therapies, talk therapies, etc. Because he posits we have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and that the human personality, the human mind, likes congruency between those 3 things. So if we change a behavior, our beliefs shift to have reduced dissonance or to have consistency, and our feelings align along those behaviors, etc. So those 3 things were like, yes, I can take Lifton's criteria, I can take everything else that I've read, and I can make a new model based on those 3 things to describe mind control. But then as I was going through all of the things like sleep manipulation, dietary manipulation, change of clothing, change of names, rituals, as I was going through all of that, there was a missing element, which I realized was information. The lack of informed consent when people are being recruited into destructive groups, whether by lying, by withholding vital information, or by distorting information to make it more palatable, that was a major feature of a destructive group versus a healthy group. And I know we'll get into the influence continuum later. And then I started thinking about other information, like how my recruiter found out all these details about my background, fed that information to one of the leaders, who then used that information to make me believe that they had mystical powers and could kind of know my spirit. But I didn't understand that this information was being funneled and then used against me. Or that they would plant people in small groups who were pretending to be new members, but they weren't, and they were kind of used as spies. Again, to feed information to the leadership in order to have an impact, or to use confessions and to use that information against someone. So the bottom line is, I came up with these 4 criteria, and in the 1988 edition of Combating, it was in a different order. And as soon as the book came out, a minister friend of mine said, you know, if you switch the order, you can make this acronym called BITE, B-I-T-E, so people could remember it more easily. And I was like, thanks, buddy. That's a great idea. And so the BITE model was created. And it really is like a laundry list of different variables in these 4 dimensions that I believe not every destructive group does every single thing. And there are good groups that do some of the things, but they don't do all of the things. But with this lens, the control of behavior, control of information, control of thoughts, and control of emotions, one can then have a handy way of sorting. Now I see you have it on the screen. One can have a toolbox for evaluating anything that you encounter, whether it's a relationship with a woman or a man, or a work situation with a company, or a multi-level marketing group, or, you know, literally anything. And you can see it later. You'll show the influence continuum. You'll see it's on the unhealthy side or it's on the healthy side. And that's a lot of my hope in doing this podcast and in giving lectures and interviews, is I want to empower everyone on the planet to understand how the mind works and how to protect themselves from undue influence, which is a legal term for an exploitative relationship where someone with more power is taking advantage of someone with less power.
I love it. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just dig into, we're going to go deep, because what I want you to do is describe what cults do. And our intent is for Mormons and post-Mormons.
You just said cults. I buzzer.
Oh, no, listen, I'll use the word, because the you know, okay. And I know you and I talked about not using the word cult. Here's what I thought about.
I'm teasing you, Jim.
Okay, thank you. By framing this as how to help the Mormon church improve learning from cults, the context isn't framing the Mormon church as a cult, but instead it's like, hey, everyone wants to do better. The Mormon church can do better. And so here's what cults do. Now Mormon church, don't do those things, right? That's kind of that's the context.
Great.
Also, and I'll share a slide that I shared previously to our listeners, is that our intent with this interview is to find ways that John Dehlin and Mormon Stories Podcast can improve. We want to help Mormons in their faith transition process their experiences, because to the extent that they've been exposed, and let's just be clear, theoretically the Mormon church could be fine, but let's just say a local bishop, a local congregational leader could run his ward like a cult, right? Or a mission president out in the mission field. There could be a ton of great mission presidents, but maybe a mission president runs his mission like a cult. We want to help Mormons process their faith transition in that context, even if we're not calling the church a cult itself. And then we want to help people who've even left the church, in or out, learn principles of healthy living, of leadership principles, of organizational principles. And we want everyone to just see the church for what it is, and again, help the church improve. So that's the context of what we're doing. So let's dive in. If you'll talk about,
can I interrupt you
please,
for a second?
please.
Just say that over the decades and in my influence continuum, I've gotten to a place where I talk about benign cults or positive cults and destructive cults. So, for example, I was interviewed by a writer who wrote a book called The Cult of Mac. And I'm in that book because since 1982, I've only had Mac computers and I have iPhones and everything else. Or some people have talked about my Jewish temple as a cult because we hug people when we see each other and we're close to each other. Not everybody hugs, but we're a tight-knit group of people, but people are free to come and go. Nobody tells us what we can read and what we can't read. People often are questioning the authority, and it's totally cool. You know what I'm saying? So I just wanted to add that little twist in there, that the word cult doesn't, for me at least, doesn't always mean destructive cult. So I think what you're saying is you want to explain what destructive cults are about and how the Mormon Church doesn't want to have any of those attributes.
I love it. I love it. That's right. And let me just pause. Stephen, as soon as you're done, I want my listeners to know what we're going to do is bring on a live panel of LDS folk. And what we want to do is, I'm getting an echo. What I want to do is bring on a panelist of other people and discuss Mormonism from this context.
With me?
No. You have to leave, and so I'll be bringing on other people.
Oh, okay. I want to see the video though when you're.
Absolutely. Yeah, but I want to let people know what they can do. Tim is going to post a link to our Zoom call, and we're going to bring panelists on. So what you have to do is download Zoom, click on the link, and you'll be able to participate in this conversation. So if you want to join the post debrief of Steve's conversation, go to the comments, download zoom.us/download, click on the Zoom link, and we'll have that conversation. Okay, so without any, go ahead, Steve. Steven?
No, I was just saying what a great idea.
Yeah, and we'll share it with you for sure afterwards.
Great.
So let's, without any further ado, tell us about behavior control, and you can kind of use this slide as a goal. Now remember, let's try and time our comments so that we go about 30 minutes on the BITE model. So we'll basically have to give about 7 minutes to the B, to the I, to the T, and the E. And I've got a couple slides per. And so, think about that pacing as we go. Is that okay?
I don't have a watch in front of me, but
I'll help you.
Take my phone. No, you have it written out. Do you want me to go through each?
Yeah. Just kind of describe what cults do for behavior.
So I guess I want to start, and just because I want to add to what you already have up and will be presenting. Developmental psychology assumes when you're an infant, your parent needs to make all the decisions for you, needs to control everything in order to help the infant grow up. And the assumption in developmental psychology is that the goal is by 18 to 21, you're an adult where you should be able to be thinking for yourself, where the locus of control is within you, and you have a good relationship with yourself, and you have skills to navigate social skills, intellectual skills, etc. And so when people are hearing about behavior control, understand you need to control your kids' behavior. You don't want them running out into the street, and they need to eat and they need to sleep and all that good stuff. Where the problem comes in for me with destructive, unhealthy groups is the unhealthy raising of children, whether it's corporal punishment, which there's overwhelming evidence is not a good thing and it's very traumatizing, does not promote secure attachment, or the indoctrination of phobias, which I know is the E, John, in the BITE model, but I just wanted to mention it here. Ideally, the destructive groups, the model of destructive groups in my model was the moon cult that I was in. but I've since applied it to literally thousands of other organizations that I never knew existed, but people read my book and said, hey, you were describing my group. So these are themes of the BITE model, like regulating physical environment. And just remember, there's a continuum, and depending on where you are inside the organization, there can be less control or more control. I have another graphic in combating of a pyramid, and then circles emanating from the base of the pyramid of what I call fringe members. So the control of reality when you're at the base or emanating outside that base is going to be much less extreme than if you're in the pyramid itself or in the hierarchy. So there's much more regimentation and much more control. The theme with destructive cults is they don't want you to grow up. They don't want you to be independent, individuated adults. They want you to be dependent and obedient. That's the theme of behavior control, and that's the goal of behavior control, in my opinion, to make people who are suppress their own will, their own conscience, their own heart, their own creativity, in service of the ideology and the power structure. So within that, there's everything from sleep manipulation. I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. I was told Armageddon was going to happen any moment, that we had to harvest, the ripe souls. We were told, I was told to drop out of college and quit my job and donate my bank account and move into the center. I was told what I could eat, what I couldn't eat. I had my hair cut off. I was put in a 3-piece suit, which was not what I was into at 19 years of age in college. I was even asked if I loved God more than my poetry. I was a creative writing major in college, and they used the story of Abraham being asked by God to sacrifice his son Isaac, and they literally said, we think your Isaac is your poetry, Steve. Like, you love God more than your poetry. And they asked me to throw it out, and I threw it in the garbage. And unlike the biblical story where Isaac wasn't killed, I never got my poetry back. But from a destructive mind control perspective, it was a powerful offering up of who I was prior to the group, in submission to the cult identity that was dependent and obedient to the group. And that's another key theme in my work that I describe as a mental health professional, that it's almost like a dissociative disorder is going on with people in mind control cults, where they have their real thoughts and then the group thoughts, and their real feelings and the group feelings. And the group identity suppresses who the person really is. And this is especially true in the case of people who are gay, for example. If they're in a homophobic organization that says God doesn't love gays and it's an abhorrent sin, etc., people are in a bind where they're constantly feeling a pressure to deny their ontological, their existential self, which I think is horrible. John, you know that I'm a human rights guy. I believe in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if there's anybody in the Mormon Church that wants to see a doctrine that Steve believes in, it's like, read the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because that's pretty close to spot on everything that I am working towards.
Absolutely.
How am I doing with the BITE model? Do I need to go?
No, that's good. So you've talked about regulating the physical reality.
Financial manipulation.
Go ahead and read. You can read through these bullets and talk about that. Just briefly comment about them if you want.
So I was told who I could live with. I had to ask permission for any major decision. I think that may be the next slide. I was told what to wear, what I could eat. I did a lot of fasts with just water to purify myself from sin. I turned over my bank account. I had no vacation time. I worked 7 days a week. I was praying maybe 2 to 3 hours a day. And reading the Bible and reading the doctrine of the Moonies called the Divine Principle. And if I wanted to go see my sick mother, I had to ask permission. And if I was told that, you're needed here, Steve, pray for your mom, I wouldn't visit my mother. And that's another consistent theme around behavior control, that you can't do what you feel is important for you to do unless you get approval from someone above you.
Right. Okay. So that kind of covers slide 1.
Yep.
Regulating diet and food, regulating sex, regulating appearance with
Let me
with
just
hair.
say about sex for a second. So I was 19 years old, and I was programmed that all women were evil. I was programmed in my cult that Eve seduced Adam sexually after she was raped by Lucifer, and therefore all women were trying to rape me. Any self-pleasuring or masturbation was a terrible sin. I never did that in 2.5 years of membership. I had 2 nocturnal emissions, which I had to fast and take cold showers after. And when I tell people I was 19 to 22, like the height of male hormonal, activity, I was just suppressing all of that energy, all that natural stuff that was so important in my maturation. And it just was so unhealthy. And it took me a year after I got out of the group of counseling and therapy to be able to kiss a woman and not have all of the programming from the cult in my head. And it was so liberating to be able to be normal again.
I love it. Okay. And of course, lots of indoctrination and rituals and permission required for major decisions. Let's go to the next slide. I'll read them and then you can talk about them. So thoughts, feelings, and activities reported to superiors.
Yep.
Rewards and punishments used to modify behaviors. Discouraging individuals.
Is huge.
Yeah.
Education is huge. And
discouraging individualism, encouraging groupthink, rigid rules and regulations, punishment, sometimes even physical punishment, threatening harm to family or friends.
That one when I started helping sex trafficking survivors and labor trafficking survivors, I felt like I had to add it to the BITE model, even though I know most of the groups that I work with do not do these extremes. There's a cult that's in the news a lot lately called NXIVM, where women were being branded near their genitals with the initials of the cult leader, Keith Raniere. But that's more the exception than the rule. And then if you leave a pimp or a trafficker or some of these groups, they will literally threaten to harm your family or friends, to kill them in some cases. Again, the trafficking is about raping or being raped. The number one thing, as I was saying earlier about behavior control, is to instill dependency and obedience. Where if you have conscience that says, no, I can't do this, but the rules and regulations say you have to do this, destructive, unhealthy group, they make you do this. And for me, John, I think we may have touched on this when we chatted earlier this week. For me, in my life of faith, however you want to understand the Bible and the Garden of Eden story of Adam and Eve and God, God didn't make Adam and Eve robots or mind control slaves. Like, if Almighty God wanted that, I'm sure God could have created Adam and Eve to be dependent robotic slaves. God wanted to give them free will deliberately, is my understanding. And therefore, any group that comes along that says, we know what God wants, and you need to be dependent and obedient and give up your free will, is going against the great metaphor of the Bible.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've got, let's see, we've got discouraging individualism, imposing rules and regulations, punishing, threatening harm to family and friends, sometimes rape, either forcing individuals to rape or be raped, dependency and obedience, and sometimes corporal punishment.
So ISIS does force people to rape for Allah, and just a terrible terrorist cult, basically. But a different religion, Islam. But as the Moonies is a perversion of Christianity, ISIS and is a perversion of Islam, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Okay, so that covers behavior. Do you feel like we covered it in a good overview?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm open to people, improving this. By the way, if
absolutely
they've been left off or whatever.
So let's do this. I'm going to read the bullets, and then you comment about the bullets. Is that
Great.
okay?
Great.
So the second one's information, and we'll do the first slide first. So deception, deliberately withholding information, distorting information to make it more acceptable, systematically lying to the cult member.
So I just want to emphasize that information is the food we use to think. And if we don't have truthful information, our minds are being controlled. Our minds are being manipulated. So this is huge. And I just want to add that in terms of recruiting new members, like I know there's a big difference between people born into a group versus people who are out doing missionary work, recruiting people. But especially if you're recruiting people, an ethical group has an obligation to not do high pressure sales techniques, but to disclose honestly what's going on. So to pick the Jehovah's Witnesses for a minute, which is a group that when I wrote Combating initially, I didn't think of as a destructive cult. And then I started hearing from hundreds of former members who loved Combating. What I didn't understand is when they go door to door and they say, we'd like to study the Bible with you, they're using their own New World translation of the Bible that no theologian, Christian or Jewish, admits is a legitimate translation and an accurate translation of the Bible. So every person that is approached by a Jehovah's Witness is being lied to and manipulated, thinking they're following the Bible, but it's hearing, what the Watchtower Society wants them to hear. So it's absolutely critical. And I also want to comment, and I hope this is okay, John, but a number of years ago, I was invited to speak at an ex-Mormon Foundation conference and to present my BITE model. And I listened to a man who had been teaching at the LDS Institute, and he taught a class called Lying for the Lord, Deception as a Management Tool of the LDS Church. And I listened to his presentation, and he blew my mind. He started with Joseph Smith, and he ended with a recording where he's saying to his boss, so you're telling me I have to lie to my students? And his boss said, yes, that's correct, otherwise you're fired. And he said, well, then I quit. And I'm forgetting the name of the man, but it was the most glaring thing for my education about the Mormon Church of deception. Like if they're making their teachers lie to their students, there's really something off.
That's a problem. Yeah. Okay. Minimizing and discouraging access to non-cult sources of information, including internet, TV, radio, books, articles.
So this is
newspapers, magazines, other media, critical information, former members, keeping members so busy they don't have time to think and investigate, control through cell phone with texting, calls, and internet tracking. Go ahead.
right. So information, again, is the food, the tools we use to think. And all destructive groups program their members to not trust critics or former members. Like in the mind of a good member that's obedient, uh, there's no legitimate reason to ever leave. And so if you've left and you're no longer in the faith, there's something inherently wrong with you. You're being controlled by Satan. There's all numbers of labels, but there's no, like, why don't you hear what they have to say and think about it, whether it makes sense for yourself? And that's really the essence of my work, helping families to get loved ones involved with destructive groups, to take a time out, step back, and actually learn about the BITE model and mind control, and actually look at the material and listen to the stories of former members and critics, and make up your own mind. Like, you're an adult, make up your own mind, whether this is the God you believe in, or this is an organization that you believe deserves your time and energy and money or not. So, and then of course, just keeping people busy is huge. And I'm just seeing a lot of mind controllers. And I also work on cases where a woman's controlling a man and isolating him from his family and friends and taking him over, or a man doing the same to a woman. And they're constantly texting and constantly tracking where they're going, and etc. And it's just not a healthy relationship at all. And that's what we call a one-on-one mini cult or micro cult.
Yeah, and just this outsider. I think just this idea of we tell insiders something different than what we tell outsiders. There are different levels where the more advanced you get in the organization, kind of like Scientology, the more access you get to information,
Right.
and leaders kind of keeping things to themselves that aren't generally available outside. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's huge, the insider doctrine and outsider doctrine. I think a legitimate organization, there's one truth. So it doesn't matter where you are in the pyramid, or insider, outsider, this is the facts. This is who we are. This is what we believe. This is our mission statement. And not, we'll tell you what we think you're ready to know, or what you're willing to swallow. I have to tell you a quick story in the Moonies, because I've heard about this in hundreds of other groups. But when I was being taught to be a lecturer, I was told that, Steve, people are spiritual babies, and you can't feed a baby steak. They will choke on it. You got to feed it formula or applesauce. So you can't tell people that we believe Father's the Messiah, because they won't join. So you have to feed them what you think they're ready to swallow, and only when they're ready, feed them, food, more substantive things of what we believe. And of course, I believed that when I was a true believer.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's go to the next slide for information control. Spying on other members, using cult-generated information and propaganda, and then unethical use of confession. Talk about those.
So the characteristics of a destructive group, and I don't know if any of your listeners have read George Orwell's 1984. He was writing about communism. This idea that Big Brother is spying on you, or using, in the Chinese communist system, having spies, where everybody is made to feel like if you don't report your brother or your sister, if they're violating a rule, then you're collaborating with Satan. And so people are urged, for the sake of God and for the sake of the Mother Church, or the organization to spy. Of course, in Hitler, the political Nazi cult, people were turning in their parents because they were saying bad things about Hitler and other things like that. And then in terms of the extensive use of cult-generated information, I mean, the wealthier groups can just do amazing propaganda, like glossy magazines, TV shows, radio shows, having celebrities. They can afford to create the illusion of how wonderful the group is, how it's the fastest growing group on the planet. I know at least 100 destructive groups that say they're the fastest growing religion on the planet. And then just a lot of propaganda where they're taking great sayings of great people out of context for their own purposes, songs, music, videos, etc. And then the confession is just about using private information. Like, part of the healthy thing about being an adult is that you have different levels of what you're willing to share with others. And of course, if you're in an intimate marriage, you want to share with your partner those feelings. But in a mind control group, there's this feeling from the top that we should know everything. There shouldn't be any secrets in people's lives. We should know everything. And it's so unhealthy. I think having healthy boundaries is really important for good mental health. Oh, I lost your sound, John.
Sorry, I was on mute for a second. I love it. Okay, so we've covered information. Now let's go to thought. I'll read the big bullets and then you just chime in. Good. Requiring members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth, changing a person's name and identity, using loaded language and cliches, encouraging only good and proper thoughts, hypnotic techniques, and manipulation of memories. Go ahead.
Lots there. So, again, cognitive dissonance theory, our thoughts and our beliefs are they're kind of the filters we use for how to navigate reality. And the thing about an ideology that says we are the sacred science, we know, the secrets of the universe. And if you adopt that as reality instead of this is one theory or one map, it's really problematic, because then you get stuck in that, using that as your filter. The destructive groups often have the black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil grid, where things are very binary and very polarized. Thought stopping is a behavior modification technique that can actually be used to help people in an ethical way or in an unethical way. The way destructive groups use it is unethical, in my opinion. And the way it works is this. I'll use myself and the Moonies as an example. If I would be listening to a lecture or some indoctrination of the Moonies and I disagreed with it, I was told that that was an evil spirit trying to invade my mind. It was a satanic spirit, and that I needed to chant, pray, or do something to center myself to get rid of the satanic evil energy that was trying to invade me. So in that process, my cult self was doing this automatic thought blocking and stopping technique. But in reality, I was deprived of the ability for me to make my own decisions and think through a thought analytically and critically. And it's a really big problem when a group programs people with these thought-stopping techniques. Some groups will use speaking in tongues, meditation. There's all kinds of different techniques. But we need to be able to analyze and think through and take opposing points of view and listen to the facts and judge them, and use our art and our critical thinking to guide us, because maybe we need to change our beliefs. Maybe we need to shift and not accept the authority as the ultimate authority. Maybe things are different than we thought. And loaded language is huge, because there are terms that are only have meaning within the group itself. So they serve a function of making people feel closer to each other because they're using the same loaded terms. But that also is what Lifton referred to in his book as thought terminating cliches, where the words become like a label where your thoughts stop. Because, well, that's what that is. Example in the Moonies would be a chapter 2 problem. What is a chapter? Well, in the Divine Principle, chapter 2 is about the fall of man and sexual problems. So any issue between men or women or gay or whatever was a chapter 2 problem. And any problem with relationships, horizontal or vertical, were Cain Abel relationships. And in the Moonies, you had to submit to your Abel figure and mindlessly follow whatever they told you to do. Some groups changed names. They all change your identity to be that group's identity. In my case, I did not have a name change. And let me just talk about hypnosis for a minute. Hypnosis is not sleep, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about what it is. It's actually a very naturalistic state where we're very absorbed, kind of in the zone, where other things are irrelevant, and we're so concentrated in that zone that we're not analyzing what's happening. So when people talk about sports and their every shot they take is going in, if it's in basketball or golf or whatever, they're in a kind of hypnotic trance state. They're not thinking analytically about what's happening, in the world. They're like in the game. So the thing about hypnotic states is that I can't think of any destructive groups that say, we're going to hypnotize you now. But they'll often do visualizations or guided visualizations, or have you do deep breathing, or have you repeating a phrase or a meditative statement or something like that. And while you're doing that, again, it's your critical thinking goes offline, so your mind is more receptive to ideas being implanted, essentially. I've done many workshops.
Yeah. And I thought about, originally I didn't include this as something that I thought about, but if you're let's just say you're in a religious experience and there's music, or there's a boring talk, or there's some sort of presentation you're watching that lulls you into kind of boredom or a trance-like state of just kind of like boredom, that can be what you mean by hypnosis, right?
Boredom is a very effective way to induce trance states, by the way. I'm going to take a minute to just say a few more things about hypnosis, just because I thought of something that is relevant for LDS folks. So with hypnosis, you can do, we have 5 basic senses: seeing and hearing and tasting and smelling and touching. And in hypnotic language, one can have a positive hallucination or a negative hallucination in any of those 5 senses. What do I mean by hallucination? It means, for example, if I was going to positively hallucinate a dog here in my office, maybe my last dog, Flame, I'm in a mildly hypnotic state because I'm visualizing something that isn't there. That's what's known as a positive hallucination. Making something there that isn't there, or hearing your favorite song come into your mind. That would be an auditory hallucination. Negative hallucination is where something is there and you make it disappear, which I frequently have to do when I'm doing media interviews and things. I make the cameras disappear so I can pay attention and not get too nervous and just talk with the interviewer and such. I'm actually imagining, John, that we're together versus me staring into the camera of my computer.
You're doing great, Steve. You're doing great.
Thanks. But what I wanted to say about the LDS folks that I've worked with is they talked about a burning in their bosom as a proof experience for them. And I just want to raise the question about hypnosis and experience. And is this a sign that the Mormon Church is legitimate, or is this replicable in other contexts with other types of phenomena? And I've seen this over and over again with many people from many different groups where I'll ask someone, so what made you decide that this was the group you wanted to join? Well, I saw the golden light around the guru, and I talk about positive hallucination, and I talk about how he was listening to meditation tapes that suggested and put the idea in his head that when he met the perfect master, he would see a golden halo around the leader. We can have those types of experiences and attribute them to spiritual causes when in fact they're human, a question that may be humanly generated. So I just wanted to add that one in there too, John.
I love it. Okay. Well, we've only got, you've got 7 minutes and you have to leave. Is that right?
I have another client.
Okay.
So yes.
So let's, I'm going to just, so thought control, thought stopping, which is teaching people to stop negative thoughts, rejecting rational analysis and critical thinking, constructive criticism, forbidding critical questions about leader, doctrine, or policy, labeling alternative belief systems as illegitimate, evil, or not useful, installing a new map of reality. Those are all elements of thought control. Well, I want to get to the continuum really quickly.
Yep.
So let's just talk about emotion control in 2 minutes, and then we'll talk about the continuum.
So on the one hand, you're made to feel super special, part of the elite, part of the chosen that has this glorious future, whether you're going to heaven or you're going to outer space or whatever. But the reality on a day-to-day basis, because of the rigid rules and because of the high standards that the group has for people, when I say high, I mean not human standards, people experience tons of guilt and shame and fear. And for me, healthy groups, particularly spiritual organizations, should be based on love, unconditional love, compassion, kindness, charity, peace, and not on guilt and fear programming. So that's the short one. And I'll just say that phobia indoctrination is the universal destructive mind control technique in my research. It's the implantation in people's minds that if they leave the group, terrible things are going to happen to them. And I have 4 pages single-spaced in my Freedom of Mind book in chapter 10 of the most common phobias. But the gist of it, John, is that when you have a phobia, you can't visualize yourself out and happy and fulfilled. You can only generate negative scenarios. If I leave, I'm going to be miserable, a drug addict, commit suicide, become a prostitute, be homeless. You can't imagine, oh, I'm going to have a great job, great friends, travel the world, have a marriage, etc., etc. And the minute people are able to meet former members who are happy and fulfilled and doing all those things, it's an immediate threat to the phobia programming, which is cycling back why destructive environments program members against former members, to not trust them, like them, shun them, disaffiliate with them. But I think love is stronger than mind control, and I think truth is stronger than lies. So
Hopefully, usually, we hope that's true.
that's my operating belief system.
I like it. Yeah. So extreme emotional highs and lows. You mentioned love bombing, praise. You
So love
mentioned,
bombing is about effusive praise designed to flatter the person in order to get them to do what you want them to do.
yeah. And again, this idea of if you leave, I once had someone tell me a cult is any organization that won't let you leave with your dignity intact. And so, scared of leaving, you'll lose your salvation. You won't be able to raise your kids. You won't be a moral person. How could anyone be, healthy and leave their religion? Okay, so let's end. I love this influence continuum slide. And it's got three, for those who are listening, it's got three sort of horizontal columns for individuals, then for leaders, and then for organizations. And I just think this is a roadmap for individual health, for being a healthy leader, and for being a healthy organization. So would you spend our last few minutes just talking us through this continuum?
Sure. Again, the healthy side recognizes that people are born with authentic selves, and that indeed, I believe, healthy parenting is really recognizing your child as a unique being, and that you're a steward to help them grow up to be themselves, versus on the destructive side to be an extension of your ego or a clone of who you are. The healthy side of parenting is really recognizing that authentic self. And it's love-based, that's unconditional. Conditional love is based on performance, doing what the group wants you to do. In the healthy thing, I believe we have a conscience that guides us. We know if we're doing something wrong. I mean, an easy guide with ethics is, would you want someone to do it to you? And if you wouldn't, don't do it to anyone else. That's a simple one. But in the case of destructive groups, the doctrine is everything. You have to believe no matter what your conscience tells you. And I did see your TEDx talk, John, and you were talking about your conscience and your crisis of meeting a gay person that you really liked, who was very helpful to you. And holy mackerel, I have this doctrine that's telling me that there's something wrong with them, but no, they're real human beings. It was an elegant, for me, demonstration of this point. But going down the continuum, because I know we're running out of time, having free will and the ability to critically think, you need to have other sources of information. What I'm seeing now in the internet is just an incredible amount of search engine manipulation by wealthy groups to shut down negative information, or former members, or sites are being shut down that wealthy groups try to sue. And the destructive groups just want to control, make everybody do what they say is right. And for leaders, they have to be accountable, they have to be transparent, they have to be honest, they need to empower the people around them. And healthy organizations have checks and balances, and that means having outsiders to reality test important decisions, and not just having insiders who have a vested interest in the status quo and keeping things going the way they've always done. And in the case of means creating the ends, in the Moonies, I was always told, right now we have to lie because Satan's the god of this world. But later, when we have the Garden of Eden on earth, everyone will tell the truth. But when I got out, I realized you're not going to have a loving, truthful world based on lies and manipulation. And so this ends justifying the means is another big red flag of a destructive organization. And you need to have the freedom to leave. If a group or a situation is stifling you or suffocating you, you need to have permission within yourself and ultimately within the organization to say, we're going to miss you. We wish you would stay, but we wish you well. And the unhealthy groups are, in this black and white, all or nothing. If you're in our group, you're in the truth, you're with God, and if you leave, then you're lost. So that's my quickie on influence.
I love it. Well, Stephen Hassan, it's rare for me to sort of be really overwhelmed with not just be overwhelmed by someone's brilliance and experience in this domain, because I've been doing it for so long, but I've also been very isolated. But it's also very rare for me to be so overwhelmed personally and organizationally. I'm reworking all the content for my workshops and retreats based on just the little that I've learned from you. So I have a request, Stephen. The world needs more of you, and I need to figure out, and I don't mean that to flatter you, I think you've got some answers that can be transformative for our world. And honestly, because the word cult gets used, I think there's just a lot of people that turn you off. I listened to your presentation at the Ex-Mormon Foundation years ago, but because the word cult came up, I'm like, well, I don't want to associate with that. That's too insulting. But the truth is, the wisdom in here is profound. So what can people do to help you? And what can we do to get more of you, Stephen?
Well, first of all, I'm very flattered, and I was helped 43 years ago to wake up, and I'm honored that my work has helped you and may help many more people. I'm actually in a doctoral program right now because I want to do quantitative research on the BITE model and the influence continuum to show it as a scientifically validated instrument. So I have a nonprofit called freedomfromundoinfluence.org. So if anyone is interested in doing research, or anyone would like to contribute, so we can hire some research assistants to do this, because I really would like to change the legal system and get the concept of undue influence updated to 2018. And other than that, I would love to find young, passionate, intelligent mental health professionals and others who want to learn what I'm doing, because I'm 64, and there's not enough of hours in the day to do what needs to get done. The work is, as you say, planetarily important. North Korea is the quintessential mind control dictatorship political cult, by the way, and the people there are just imprisoned. So the work is great, and I'm open to doing teaching with you, John. I look forward to meeting you in person, and thank you for all your good work and for this invitation.
I want to hold you to that. So our goal is, how do we meet in person? Maybe we bring you to Utah. Maybe I come to Massachusetts. Maybe both. And let's teach together. Let's do webinars, whatever would be beneficial to you. I'm all in.
Yeah, and people fly from all over the world to work with me for a week intensively to help themselves or their family. So that's how I pay the bills, is my individual therapy work. But I would love to train more people, and I look forward to meeting you and working with you, John.
The book is Combating Cult Mind Control with Stephen Hassan. Stephen, what's the website again? What are the two websites?
freedomofmind.com and freedomfromundoinfluence.org. And of course, I have Twitter, which is Cult Expert, and Facebook, and all the other things that are on my website.
All righty. Thank you, Stephen Hassan. It's great to have you. You can take off, and we appreciate it. Listeners, don't stop, because now what we've got, we're very excited.
Send me the link, because I'll share it with my network.
We will absolutely send you the link, multiple links. But thank you, Stephen.